Kentucky. Marlon Taylor catches the alley-oop, throws it down. His head was above the rim.
I mean, he got up, and this was a good game and a very nice win by LSU on the road at Rupp. Questionable call at the end, surprisingly, go against Kentucky in that arena late in the game.
Spurs and Grizzlies, Rudy Gay, baseline rock in the rim.
Rudy Gay's having a good season there with San Antonio. You think that he would fit into that system, an all-round player, good two-way player, can shoot the J, drives to the hole after having that horrific injury a couple years ago. Good for him.
Lakers and Hawks, LeBron threading the needle to Brandon Ingram.
This is what LeBron was doing through three quarters last night. I think he had 14 assists through three quarters. He was playing point center and was distributing the ball very well.
And the Lakers, from the beginning, missed 5 or 6 layups. LeBron, right in the restricted area, gives them where they need it. First play of the game.
First play of the game, Kuzma. And Kuzma missed 2 more layups the rest of the way.
Celtics and Sixers, Jason Tatum spinning off of Joel Embiid and then dunking over Ben Simmons.
All right, so Tatum's got a little bit of extra for Philly. He thought he should have been the #1 pick of the draft. Philly traded up from 3-2-1 to avoid taking so they could take Markelle Fultz. So he always got a little extra for them. This was a super highlight by him and a great game last night.
Huge win by the Celtics in Philadelphia.
Philly Boston's their bugaboo, man.
They got their number.
It sure seems like.
All right, to the NFL now. Despite having 3 years left on his deal with the Steelers, Antonio Brown has reportedly requested a trade. This stemming from the fallout of skipping practice the final week of the season and subsequently being benched for the final game. Quick history, Steelers missed the playoffs. Brown doubled down on his desire to leave yesterday, tweeting, "Thank you, Steeler Nation, for a big 9 years. Time to move on and forward." Cece, how did we get here? How did all of this come to this?
It didn't come to this just over one argument. It's just like anything else, any other relationship that falls apart. Typically, when the breakup happens, you get into the blame game. Or whose fault was it? It's their fault. It's not my fault. No one wants to look at themselves. But the Pittsburgh Steelers and Antonio should take some blame in this. The Pittsburgh Steelers, because it's their organization, and they've done things a certain way, but they have decided to allow a player who happens to be a wide receiver, and that happens to be AB, over the years, bend the rules, no different than a child. So when the child realizes that the parents aren't going to enforce the rules, or one of the parents is easier than the other one, which Mike Tomlin, everyone says he's a player's coach. In the press conferences, he acts like he's a tough guy, but he's run that locker room in a totally different fashion. And when Mike Tomlin took over the Pittsburgh Steelers, people forget, 34 years old, taking over a veteran team with plenty of patience and knowing that the organization was going to support him. He won the interview process. They were going to hire someone else.
Yep.
But he won the interview process, so they hired him, took a chance on him. They got the right guy. But let's not forget, he was a young guy that took over a veteran team with a great organizational support. So that's part of the reason why he's had success. But how he's dealt with AB and allowing him to get away with a number of things, disciplinary things, being late to meetings, changing the rules where he could sleep somewhere else at training camp. And yes, for star players, do they do certain things a little different? Yes. But when you start to lose and the younger players start to see this, it starts to eat away. So guys start to take exception and be like, well, why can't I do it? He does it. So that's what's happened in Pittsburgh. So the Pittsburgh Steelers are at fault. And Antonio, he's at fault because through the years, he's gotten worse and worse, even though on the field, he's gotten better.
Listen, on the field, these are two separate things. Because on the field, the production is unquestioned and unprecedented. But off the field, to use both of your analogies and stretch them further, you said like with a child, like with a kid. You extend the bedtime 15 minutes, about 2 weeks later, I want another 15 minutes. Like you immediately get used to the adjustment and ask for more and more and more. And like a relationship, if you don't address the root causes of the arguments, even if you might go a couple months without an argument, even if things are going great, you're winning football games, you're making all-pro teams, those root causes are still there. They never addressed Antonio Brown's growing sense of entitlement, and it seemed like they never addressed he and Big Ben's almost, dueling, we need each other but don't necessarily like each other relationship. And so as AB continued off the field, within the Steelers organization and outside of it, to make more and more reckless decisions, this was almost inevitable.
And it's hard, even for Ben, with all his experience and his leadership, being a captain, all those things, Super Bowl champ, all those things. It's hard to be critical of the players when the coaches aren't being critical. And that's one thing, man. I remember when Dennis Green, when we had our biggest problem, it was when I decided to chastise one of my teammates and Dennis didn't support me. And at that point, I knew my days were numbered in Minnesota. I knew I couldn't stay there but so long. And this is just a prime example of, if you're a parent, if you're trying to run an organization, hashtag do what you want to do. Because that's what AB ended up. In his 8 years watching this relationship, they let him do what he wanted to do. Get to practice whenever you want to. Get to the building whenever you want to. And when you do that, this can only be the end result. They're lucky that they got the superior play out of him. And that's the reason why this took so long, because he works so hard. He spends so much money on his body. His performance on the field, Julio Jones, is second to none. Those are only two people you can talk about over this span that you can say, man, these two guys right here are on the level that no other receivers are on in the NFL.
And the other element to it, and I'm glad you mentioned, the production, because Mike Tomlin I don't think he gave this quote himself, but he was quoted by a player as saying, it might have been Ryan Clark, I'm not sure, as saying, we will put up with it as long as the production's there. And so Antonio Brown knew that.
But that's not necessarily right either.
I think it obviously turned out not to be correct.
Of course.
My point is, if you, in any workplace, if you have incredible faith and confidence in your ability to produce, and you don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon, and you have heard either directly or indirectly, they're going to let you act however you want, as long as you keep producing, then why would I change my behavior as long as I believe I'm going to still produce?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so you're going to let me, when everyone's living in these terrible dorms at training camp, get an Airbnb? You're going to let me occasionally skip walkthroughs? But the
concession the Vikings made for me was I could bring my own mattress. And then after the Vikings saw that I was getting a special mattress, you know what they did? They ordered them up for the team.
Right. So because there are, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Every team, nearly every team, makes at least small concessions for their best players. But very often, and for the best teams, your best players are also your best leaders.
Yeah.
So they knew when you got that mattress, you weren't going to rub it in the face of a teammate. You weren't gonna lord it over people. At least I think you wouldn't. Like it would surprise me if you did, but you're kind of smiling like maybe you did that to somebody.
No, you're right.
And so AB, it was the opposite. AB flaunted the privileges and then continued to take advantage. And then, even despite all this, Jenna, I think they being the Steelers, wanted to reconcile. And AB, every step of the way this offseason, whether it's the Instagram of him in a Photoshop Niners jersey, or yesterday, essentially filing for divorce when the other party might still want to go to counseling.
Yeah, I'm just going to say to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and a great organization. Now, they've had some characters throughout their history. Now, they have allowed certain players. I know Mean Joe Green tells me a story, and Terry Bradshaw, when they get together, about when they were on the team together and Terry was running the lap, and Terry was like, man, why isn't that guy over there running? It's like, that's Mean Joe Green. Mean Joe Green don't run no laps. But so in sports, we've seen this, but typically not to the detriment of the whole team. So Nick is right. Just like no other building organization, the most talented people, will they do little things and everything? Yes. But it's to enhance that ability, not to one day have that used from a control standpoint, used against them.
And quickly before we break, how big of the drop-off will it be for the Steelers with no Lev Bell and now no, most likely, Antonio Brown?
Listen, I know you've been of the belief that the Steelers have been competitive in every decade since they've been the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not of the belief, that's a fact, that this is the most consistent organization over the history of the NFL. So I'm not going to act like losing Antonio Brown contract the franchise. But you don't get better by losing the best receiver in football. There is no way that the Steelers, even if the culture gets better, and maybe they'll end up having a better record than last year, because last year was a down year, but the Steelers will be worse. I'll tell you this much: the Browns, it's easier for the Browns to play them, for the Ravens to play them, for the Bengals to play them. We don't have to deal with 84 and the 120 yards and 1 touchdown he's going to put on our head every time he plays us. Like, they won't be as good.
All right, we'll talk much more about this and where he might go.